So it's very, very effective at narrowing down who can see what and allowing you to be able to specify exactly that. And then you can set up preferences as well so that they can have access to the preferences or not. Now most of the, besides just the placement of fields on a form and adding fields and removing fields, which is all done through the XML, you can set up various things within the schema configuration within Specify. So you can go in and you can change all of your labels for your fields. If you want them all in Spanish, you can go through and you can change them all to Spanish. There are language files available for doing that for you as well, which will convert everything into another language. You can also specify what you want that field to look like, whether you want it to be a pick list or whether you want it to be formatted or whether you want it to be a web link or whatever you want to do. You can go in and you can specify all those things. So these are all your tables. So you pick a table and then you can specify information about the table, how you want that table to be displayed. If it's displayed as a string, you can go in and put in all the individual fields and what you want the separators to be, etc., etc. You can set your aggregation, much like your multiple collectors. You can say, I want each collector to be last name, comma, first name, space, middle initial. But then if there's multiples, I want them separated by a semicolon. I only want to show 5 of them at the end, and at the end I want to say et al. If there's more than 5 of them. All of that sort of stuff is possible here. You can also set up a whole table as a web link. So if you just want it to be a web link to some outside source, you can do that as well. And then from the table, you can pick individual fields and then specify what you want those individual fields to look like. Now obviously, if you are playing around with a field that isn't on the form, it first needs to be added to the form so that you can see it. And that's the sort of stuff that is generated through the XML files behind the scenes. So where are we going in the future? There are obviously a bunch of features that were in Specify 5 that are not included in the first version of Specify 6, things like batch editing, series processing, removing of duplicate records, etc., etc. And we're obviously getting around to adding those in future versions. There is no web and digger / tapier access in the first version of Specify. It is slated for the next major release sometime in summer. They obviously realize that there are a lot of people who have in their grant proposals that they have to have web access to their collection. And so it is one of the things that's high on the list of priorities in terms of making sure that we can satisfy those needs. We then want to look at all these additional database engines that people want to use, Oracle, MS SQL, Postgres, all of those sorts of things. Majorly just going in and testing that they actually work. They should work in the first version, but we haven't tested any of them, so we need to do some serious testing to make sure that they actually work. Adding in a bunch of those web services and partnerships that we've and collaborations that we're going into, and just generally trying to make this package as holistic as possible and make it work for as many people as possible. So that's the end of the presentation part of this. So if there's any questions before we move on, or if there's any particular piece of Specify 6 that you would like to see, we can go into that in more detail. And we can either do it in Mac or we can do it in PC. Whichever catches your fancy.
I have a question about the database. If an institution would like to use a database outside of MySQL, what are the options for that? Is that service you provide, or the
it can be. It could be a. We're not really sure how this is all going to work out in terms of which database engines we're going to support in-house, or which database engines we're going to leave people to support themselves. But from what I've heard from the developers, it should be capable of handling all of the major ones: Oracle, MS SQL. And so if you have the facility in-house of somebody who has the capabilities of doing that, then they should be able to support themselves. If you don't have that facility, then it is, again, a service that we would provide.
And does that mean the business rules are on the application side or on the database side?
It's a. Again, I'm not a programmer. It's a very. What did they say? It's a very client-heavy. Or it's a.
If it's designed to be database agnostic, I mean, it almost has to be all on the client.
Well, I don't know if you have a separate kind of process for setting up the database for other for other databases.
It's a very
outside
client-heavy
MySQL,
application
they
in
have that
terms of all of the
Right.
business rules and stuff
So-
are contained in the client rather than in the host system.
I feel like they've done something. I'm from Harvard.
Mhm.
I think they were doing something to try to demonstrate it with Oracle for the Herbaria people, but I don't want to speak out of turn on that.
Yeah.
Okay, and what character sets are available for specify? Are you allowing entry in Unicode, or is that something that can
I
be
don't know.
modified?
I don't know.
If they, again, I mean, assumption, if they're going, I don't think our Herbaria would look at it for a second if it didn't have Unicode.
It definitely has Unicode, I know that much, but I'm not sure what else it supports outside of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you mentioned collaborations at the end in terms of future directions, and I think my understanding is that some of this is going to be, or all of it is going to be open source. So, first I think there's some very cool stuff in here. It's very impressive how big a jump this is ahead of Specify 5. So to take one example, like the workbench, which addresses some issues a lot of us have been grappling with in some interesting ways. Is it possible to separate that from the sort of back-end database functions of Specify, so that other groups can work on enhance it or contribute back different solutions, or how can we sort of work in a bigger community of developers?
Well, I mean, from the little that I understand about open source and the way that it works is that anybody can provide third-party plugins that will plug into an open source application as long as they provide it as open source to everybody else. So, you can come up with a third-party application that would tweak the workbench in some way to do something that you wanted it to do, and as long as you supplied it as a third-party application for the rest of the community, you're free to do what you like.
So that is sort of the underlying philosophy now.
Yeah, that's essentially the way that we're looking at it. We're looking at it as a community building exercise in terms of hoping that we'll build the core infrastructure of what this thing is going to be able to do, and then allow people to come in and create all of these little third-party applications that will plug into it and do ancillary things. One of the things I can think of is that somebody wanted to develop an ArcGIS plugin to be able to make it interoperable with ArcGIS. It's perfectly doable. I mean, we have limited, programming time to be able to get all of this stuff done, and we're hoping that, the community is going to take some of that load off of us, and that, the community will determine which direction this whole thing is going to take, and what extra capabilities are going to be built into the system.
Well, conversely, some of the elements can be turned around the other way and used, this may be nonsense, I'm not a programmer, used to plug into other applications like EMU or what other thing, other database systems that people are running.
Yeah. And there's always the capability of, running multiple MySQL databases that do different things and somehow linking them all together and then having some of that functionality show up in Specify. Those sorts of things are completely doable.
So kind of along the same lines, what's the process for user feedback from non-programmers types? Users that said, I'd like to see this feature. How do those?
We have a forum on our website, which is essentially a mechanism for people to discuss ideas amongst each other and try and get help from each other rather than having to rely solely on us. We do check the forum every so often to see if there are questions that are going unanswered that we can answer. There's also a help desk, specify at ku.edu or phone Jean, and she will literally direct your question to whoever wants to answer
I'm thinking
it for
more
you.
about, I'd like to see this feature added. How does that sort of thing get into the development process?
You can email us and let us know that it's a requirement. We also have a feedback system from within Specify where you can go in and say, I'm interested in seeing this particular feature implemented into Specify. Or the prime place to put it would be on the forum, because then if there is somebody out there who's checking the forum who sees it as an opportunity for creating a third-party application, if there's enough demand for it, some of the people in this room, even IT people, would be able to create that third-party plugin for you and then supply it as an open source thing for the whole community.